Ryan Manning. I'm the founder of Manning Asylum Law, which is an immigration law firm that focuses on asylum. I used to be an asylum officer. I was at the Houston Asylum Office for about 2.5 years, and before that, I was a diplomat for 8 years, and so I did the visa work and some other stuff related to refugees. So I've got 11 years and a half, actually, of experience with the government's two main agencies for asylum and refugee affairs. And I use that experience now to help folks all over the country get asylum in the United States, okay? And to talk about credibility. So this is basically when the government thinks you're lying. Or, unfortunately, sometimes this comes into play where maybe they believe you, but they just don't want to give you asylum, and they need an excuse to do it. Now, to deny you, that is. Now, most asylum officers, and I imagine immigration judges too, are professional and fair and competent and honest and good. But I can tell you that I think some asylum officers that I've been around and dealt with are looking for ways to deny people. They're searching for reasons to do it, and this is a go-to for them. This is one they commonly use. So you've got to convince the government that you're being honest and that you can be trusted in what you're saying. And you know, as long as everything that you say makes sense and it all fits together and there's not a lot of inconsistencies, then that's enough to show that you're credible and that, you know, the government should be should believe what you say. Now, the problem comes in where sometimes people will say things at their asylum interview that are inconsistent or contradict or don't match up with something that they said earlier during their interview or with something that was in their asylum application. That's called an inconsistency, okay? And when you make two or three of these, when you do two or three inconsistencies, the asylum officer can say, I don't know if this person can be believed. They don't sound like they're credible. And that can be the reason for denying your asylum application. If you make several inconsistent statements, they'll do that. Now, there's not a hard and fast rule on how many inconsistencies there must be in a case for the officer to deny you because you're, in their opinion, not credible. But as a rule of thumb, a general rule, I would say if there's like three things in your case that don't match up and that seem to be false or inconsistent, there's a good chance that you'll get denied. They'll make what's called a negative credibility finding and deny your case, all right? And what's really tough about this is that I've seen lots of cases where I honestly think the person was telling the truth, but they get denied because of this. The asylum officer says, oh, there were these these inconsistencies in your case, and I don't think you're credible, therefore we can't believe you, and therefore we're not going to give you asylum. And sometimes these inconsistencies are small things that really don't matter to the case, okay? Like maybe you just mix up a date, you know, you say, oh yeah, that thing happened, you know, in I think it was March of 2017, as where in your application materials that you submitted with your asylum application, you said, oh yeah, I think it was February, you know, and so you got the month off by, you know, a month or a few months. That could be an inconsistency, all right? And when you do two or three of those, that's enough for them to say, okay, this person's not credible. Now, this happens a lot, even to people that I think are telling the truth, just because they're nervous, all right? Just because the asylum interview is stressful. It's a tough environment. The officer asks question after question after question. They usually don't just let you tell your story and let you just express yourself and explain what happened or why you're afraid. They control the interview. And it's tough, okay? And there's things you can do to prepare to make it less likely that you'll make these little mistakes. But you know, you've got to, or you should, take it really seriously and be sure that you do everything you can to prepare yourself so that you don't make these kinds of mistakes at your interview and get denied because of negative credibility finding. Now, if someone is lying about their situation or about anything, then yeah, I believe they should get denied asylum. Honesty is the best policy, and just because you should be honest, I believe, but also strategically speaking, just for trying to win asylum, honesty is the best policy. It's what you should do. But you do also have to be mindful that even people who are telling the truth get denied because of this credibility issue. And that's one reason that I think it's really smart to try to get some professional help to decrease the chances that you'll make those kinds of mistakes. All right, so that's credibility. That's one of the second major reasons for asylum denials. And the third one is what an asylum officer will call inclination. Okay, this means that they don't think that someone's actually going to harm you in the future. Okay, now to get asylum, sometimes it's enough to win it based just on things that have already happened to you. If some really bad stuff has happened, then you can sometimes get asylum based just on the past, even if it looks like there's no way you're going to be harmed again in the future. But most cases, you have to show the government that, look, there still exists a possibility that I'm going to get persecuted in the future. Okay. Let me address. I see in some of the comments, folks are saying in English, only in English. Tomorrow on Friday at 11 a.m. I'm gonna do the same thing in Spanish, and so we'll talk in Spanish tomorrow. Feel free to keep watching this one if you want, or join me tomorrow at 11 a.m. on my Facebook page, Manning Asylum Law for Spanish. Speaking of comments, by the way, let me know where you're watching from. I'd be curious to hear what city and state you're in. I always like to know where people are who are applying for asylum or considering applying for asylum. So let me know down in the comments where you're at. So we're talking about one of the third reason for asylum rejections, and I said it's inclination. What does that mean? Well, it means it's the question of whether the people whom you fear, whether that's the government or whether it's private actors, the question is whether they are inclined to want to persecute you. All right. It means, is there actually a likelihood that they're going to do it, that they're going to want to harm you, and they're really going to carry it out. All right. So are they inclined to persecute you? And the way that a person proves this is often based on things that have already happened to them. If someone has already hurt you, there's a good chance they're going to want to hurt you again. Or if they started making threats to you, and said, hey, if come back, we're going to kill you. Well, that shows, yes, that these people are inclined to hurt you. But often, it actually can be tough to convince the asylum officer about this, that these people really do want to hurt me. They are inclined to persecute me. And I think, thanks, Bashir. Where I see this a lot, when I saw it as an asylum officer, both and now as an asylum lawyer, a problem that came up is people who had problems for a long time in their country, but nothing bad really ever happened to them, at least in terms of physical harm. That could sometimes be a problem. So take, for example, in the case of like Venezuela, where these groups called colectivos, these bad groups that are supported by the government, will threaten people and maybe graffiti their house or do other threatening things over the course of years, right? Well, what happens is the asylum officer goes, okay, so these threats started, in 2016, a long time ago, and they continued for a long time, but the people never did anything to you. What makes you think that they now all of a sudden are actually going to take action against you, or actually going to hurt you? It seems like it's all talk because they've made these threats and they didn't do anything. So what has changed such that they now are actually inclined to hurt you? So that's this problem of inclination. All right. Now, for people that are in this position that have been facing problems for a while, one way to deal with this problem is if you can show that, well, okay, the threats and the actions against me intensified, like they got even more intense. Like maybe at first, the threats were just like, oh, we're going to beat you up if you don't join our political party. But then, closer to the time that you fled your country, they changed in nature and they were like, we're going to kill you. Next time we see you, we're going to kill you. That threat becomes much more imminent and more grave. The harm that they're threatening is more grave. So that's a way that that you can show, look, even though, yes, I've been threatened for a while, things have intensified. The threats have increased, like the severity of the threats and the frequency of the threats. If those things increase over time, especially in the period kind of in the months before you flee your country, that's a way for you to get around this problem of the officer thinking, oh well, the threats have happened forever and they don't do anything, so therefore they're not going to do anything in the future. And that's this. Asylum officers are taught to look for this, to look for whether the threats have intensified more recently. So in your case, if that's happened to you, then it's important that you emphasize that you let the officer know that in your application materials and at the asylum interview. Okay, so that's inclination. It's the question of is the government or the bad people that you fear, are they actually inclined to hurt you? Okay, and how certain do you have to be that it's going to happen? Well, you don't have to convince the officer, oh, 100% they're inclined to persecute me. They're going to do something really bad to me. I'm positive. It's obvious. It's clear. It doesn't have to be that clear. In asylum law, they say that there has to be what's called a reasonable possibility that the persecution is going to happen. Okay, and in one court case that a lot of asylum officers will be familiar with, the court basically said that's like a 10% chance. Okay, if the officer or the immigration judge is convinced that there's like at least a 10% chance that the really bad thing is going to happen, then that's enough. That's a reasonable possibility. So you don't have to convince them that, oh, it's absolutely certain that the bad guys are going to persecute me, but you just have to convince them that there is a real chance. Okay, this is something that's serious and it really could happen to me. And the inability to do that is a major reason why a lot of asylum claims get denied. Okay, so that's inclination. Now we're on number 4, right? The fourth thing that is a major problem for asylum seekers is what they call severity. Okay, and by that I mean how severe the harm is, the persecution. Okay, so to get asylum, it has to be bad. The thing that's happened to you in the past, or the thing that you fear happening to you in the future, has to be serious. Okay, the asylum laws and policies use the word persecution, and that basically means serious harm. The word persecution isn't really defined in the law. It doesn't have a specific set out meaning, but throughout court cases and in the policies of the Department of Homeland Security, asylum officers are given guidance about what that means and how bad the harm has to be for it to rise to the level of persecution. So if someone just kind of beats you up one time, roughs you up, maybe punches you in the face a few times, or if you're afraid that's what's going to happen in the future, your claim will get denied because that harm is not severe enough to count as persecution. All right. On the other hand, on the far extreme other side, if the thing that happened to you or the thing that you fear is really bad, then it would be persecution. If you fear getting murdered, that's as bad as it gets. So that's persecution. Things like being raped or severely tortured would be persecution. But you got to be careful with the word torture because that's kind of a vague term. So in making your asylum claim, you want to avoid using the words persecution and torture, and instead actually talk about the actual harm, talk about what happened or what you fear will happen in very concrete terms, like they hit me with a baseball bat in the head 3 times and I knocked me unconscious and I was bleeding and I had to go to the hospital and stay there for 2 days and get medicine. That's the way to talk about the harm that you suffered or that you will suffer, to try to show the officer how severe it is, how serious it is, because these cases do get denied where the applicant says, the bad guys threatened me once or twice and they pushed me and I fell and I scraped my arm. Well, that's not severe enough. But of course, There's lots of middle ground between something like that and being killed, where it's a close call, and the asylum officer has to make a decision. Okay, is that harm severe enough to count as persecution? And you need to take great care in your asylum application materials and in at your interview to be able to speak with specificity about what happened to you or what you fear would happen to you, and to talk in very concrete terms about that harm, okay? To show that it's severe, that it's serious. Important thing to note before moving on is that the harm doesn't have to be just physical, all right? That's what I've talked about so far in the examples that I've given, is physical harm, where their body is actually injured by someone else. Harm that, for purposes of showing persecution, can also be psychological. All right, so if someone, for example, puts a gun to someone's head, tells them, "I'm going to kill you," and they pull the trigger, and it's a mock execution, meaning the gun doesn't actually fire and kill them. It's like, it's a blank, or there's no bullets in the gun or something. But the person who's applying for asylum really thought at that moment they were going to be killed, and that experience just like messes them up, gives them post-traumatic stress disorder or causes these problems in their life. That harm, that psychological harm, even without being physically harmed, could be enough to get asylum based on the severity of the psychological harm. And importantly, last thing about severity is that things that have happened to you in the past, or that what happened to you in the future, you can look at them collectively or combined or cumulatively to convince the officer, look, this is serious enough to count as persecution. So the officer doesn't look at just one particular act and say, was that one thing enough to count as persecution? Was it bad enough? If a group of people harms you on 4 separate occasions and the harm is not that bad, like they just beat you up kind of bad and threaten you a little bit, one of those by itself probably would not be enough to count as persecution. But considered cumulatively, or basically meaning the officer looks at, okay, it happened 4 times. We're going to consider those all together. And considering them together, okay, yeah, that's bad enough. That harm is severe enough or serious enough to count as persecution. Then that works. That's a way to establish, yes, the harm was or would be sufficiently severe to rise to the level of persecution. All right. So that's number 4. Now the fifth reason is a really important one. Okay, so you need to understand this one well, and you've got to be serious about addressing this in your application materials and at your asylum interview. And this one is what we call nexus. Okay, so if you suffered really, really bad harm in the past, people beat you up and tortured you and did all kinds of bad things to you, yes, that counts as persecution, but that's not enough to get asylum. You also have to show that harm that happened to you in the past, that persecution that happened to you or that you fear for the future, was motivated by one of 5 things about you, okay? So to get asylum, you have to show that the harm was or would be on account of, this is the language they use in the law, which basically just means motivated, at least in major part, by one of these 5 things. They call these the 5 protected characteristics or the 5 protected grounds about you, okay? And these are your race, your religion, your nationality, something called membership in a particular social group, which is really vague, and then your political opinion. Those are the 5 protected grounds. So to get asylum, you have to convince the officer that the persecution was motivated by one of those things about you. Like, look, the government did these things to me or would do these things to me because of my religion, okay? Because of my religious beliefs or my religious practices, or because of my political opinion or my political activities. All right, so one of the 5 grounds has to be the thing that motivates the bad people to harm you in order for you to get asylum. When they created the asylum laws many years ago, based on a framework that came after World War II, the government decided that, we're not going to give protection to everyone. We're just going to give protection to people who are being persecuted because of these specific things. And there's a lot of people who think that it's time to update this list of things that will get you asylum, because realities have changed. And the reality of persecution has changed, and the circumstances have changed in the world since this mechanism or this framework was put into place decades ago. But that's the way it is. So you have to show that it's one of those 5 things. And so the question is, how do you do that? How do you show the officer that, yeah, it was my religion that caused them to do this to me? Well, one of the ways is the words that the people who are persecuting you use. That's a question that you're going to get over and over again at your asylum interview is, what did they say? What did they say? What did they say? What did they say? What did they say right before they beat you? What did they say during the beating? What did they say after the beating? Because their words may indicate their motives or their reasons for persecuting you, okay? So when you are doing your asylum application and like you're writing out your what they call a personal statement, which is where you most people submit, where you tell your story, and you submit it with your application materials, you want to try to include the words, to the extent that you can remember them, the words that the persecutors used in threatening you or in harming you, because they can be really important for showing the officer, yes, it looks like it was in fact your political opinion that made them go after you, okay? And also the circumstances can show that it was one of those 5 protected grounds about you that caused the people to hurt you, or that would cause them to hurt you in the future. All right. So you have to establish this nexus. The word nexus basically means a connection between the harm and one of your protected grounds. You have to show that they're connected, and that one of those 5 protected grounds about you is the thing that is causing the people to want to hurt you. Okay. It doesn't have to be the only reason. They can want to hurt you for a lot of reasons. It has to be what they call in the law one central reason for the harm. And that basically just means it has to be a pretty significant motivating factor. It doesn't have to be the only one, but it's got to be something that makes them go, we really don't like that about that person, therefore we're going to harm them. And you want to be very thoughtful in highlighting your experiences and circumstances that show what those reasons were, okay, and that show that the harm is motivated by one of those 5 things about you. Importantly, you can also get asylum even if you don't actually possess one of those 5 protected grounds, as long as the bad guys think that you possess one of those grounds, and that's the reason that they want to persecute you. So, maybe it's a case of mistaken identity, and they think that you are a member of the opposing political party, and so they do really bad things to you because of that. Well, you could get asylum, even though you really don't have a political opinion that is different from theirs, or maybe you don't really have political opinions at all. You don't care about politics or policies or government, and it's okay. It doesn't matter. You can still get asylum as long as they think that you do, and that's the reason they persecuted you. So what really matters at the end of the day is your possession of one of these 5 protected characteristics as viewed from the perspective of the persecutor. Okay, so what's in their mind is really what's important. Okay, and this is a major reason for asylum denials. An asylum officer may be completely 100% convinced that you are telling the truth, and that some bad things really happened to you in the past, and that they're almost certain to happen to you in the future, and you'll still not get asylum if you don't show the officer that the reason these things are happening, or what happened, is one of these 5 protected characteristics about you. And so this is the case with a lot of Central American cases, right? From Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala especially. This happens all the time, that people are fleeing often gang violence, and they get here and they claim asylum, and the asylum officer probably believes them. Very often, I can tell you from anecdotal experience with my colleagues when I worked at the asylum office, officers believe these stories, like, because this stuff happens all the time, and the stories that people tell are credible and they make sense. So, it's not an issue of does the officer believe the story. It's the problem with those cases is that the asylum laws generally don't consider that kind of persecution to be linked to one of the 5 protected grounds, okay? In the past, some of those cases were able to win, and a good example of cases that used to be able to sometimes win, but now are not because of a change in policy by the government, is domestic violence cases. Those a case where it was usually a woman who had been beaten really badly could get asylum under that category that I mentioned that I said is kind of a vague one called membership in a particular social group. That used to work, but then the government changed the way that they interpret the asylum policies and the law and said, okay, that doesn't count anymore. Sorry, that we don't think that counts under this bucket of one of the 5 protected grounds, specifically the membership in a particular social group. Maybe that will change back again in the future to where the government says, okay, that counts, but for right now it doesn't. So that's why a lot of these cases, especially from Central America, get denied, is because the motivating factor behind the harm isn't really connected to one of those 5 things: race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion, okay? So when you are thinking about how to frame your case, how to present your case, you want to think of all the things that show that, okay, it really is based on one of these things. And you want to be completely honest, 100% honest, and tell the truth and not be misleading. You just want to go out of your way to highlight the things that show that, yeah, okay, it is because of my political opinion. The thing that he said, even though he didn't explicitly say it, he didn't say, I am persecuting you, or I'm going to kill you because you're from the opposing political party. But maybe they said something kind of similar that suggests that, okay? Or maybe the circumstances suggest that what the motivation was behind the persecution, okay? So that's the nexus issue, and it's a major reason why asylum cases get denied. So in summary, the 5 major reasons for asylum application rejections are the 1-year filing deadline, filing your asylum application too late after you've already been here for a year. But remember, there are exceptions to this rule, so don't think that just because you've been here for more than a year, you definitely can't get asylum. It definitely, I think, is worth it to talk to a lawyer about it to see if you might qualify for one of the exceptions, okay? The second one is credibility. If the government thinks that you're lying, you're not going to get asylum. And that happens even when people are telling the truth. They just commit these little errors that hurt their case, all right? And the third thing is inclination, which is when you don't convince the asylum officer that someone is actually inclined to and is probably going or is likely to go ahead and persecute you in the future. And to do that, you've got to point to things that indicate they're serious about it. Okay, there is a reasonable possibility, at least a 10% chance. I mean, you want it to be as clear as possible that yeah, they're going to persecute me. And you have to be mindful of highlighting that in everything that you do in your asylum case. And then the fourth thing is severity. Okay, you have to prove that the harm that you suffered or the thing that is likely to happen to you is bad, okay, that it's really serious, and that therefore that harm is serious enough to count as persecution. And then the fifth major reason for asylum rejections is this issue of nexus, of proving that the harm was or would be motivated by one of these 5 things about you, one of these 5 protected grounds or characteristics that you possess or that the bad guys at least think that you possess, okay? So those are the 5 asylum rejection reasons, the big things that I saw over and over again as an asylum lawyer and that I continue to see as an asylum I saw as an asylum officer, and I continue to see as an asylum lawyer. So, the good news is for most of those, in most scenarios, there are things that you can do to increase your chances of having success and decrease the chances that any one of those will trip you up and lead to a denial of your case. I'm going to take some questions now. You can leave them in the comments. I see other questions coming in elsewhere. Before I do that, though, let me just tell you that for those of you that are watching this live, or for those of you who watch it in replay today, what's today, the 30th, Thursday, July 30th, just as a way to say thanks for engaging with me and being here and participating, or for engaging with this live, or with the replay of this live talk. I'm going to offer you a half-off discount on a consultation with me. I do charge a small consultation fee to take the time to talk with someone in detail about their situation and to tell them whether I think they might qualify for asylum and how likely they might be to win, and to talk about other options or what their best option for getting status might be. And I'm happy to give a discount to folks who watch this live and who watch this talk and want to talk to me. So I'm going to put a link below in the comments to the link that you can use to schedule this online. You have to do it online. You can't call and ask for it and say, hey, I want to get my half off session. It has to be scheduled online. I'm not even telling the folks who answer the phone for me that I'm offering this. So if you call and ask, hey, I want the half off, they're going to go, I don't know what you're talking about. Okay, and they're not going to give it to you. You got to use this link to schedule it online. And when you do it, you're going to enter a code, a promo code, promotional code, the letters FBLIVE. So FB Live, FBLIVE in the promo code box, and that'll apply the half off, okay, for the discount. All right. So I'm going to type right now in the comment box. Here's the code to get the promo half off. And now let me just copy and paste the link to the schedule where you will go to pick a date and time. It'll show you what's available on my schedule, and you've got to input a few data points, and you pay right there on that platform using a credit or debit card. And you'll get the half off if you just put that FBLIVE in the promo box. All right. I want to see what questions we've got. Okay, I got a few questions about doing this talk in Spanish. As I mentioned earlier, maybe you're just now joining me. Yeah, I'm gonna go over this stuff, everything we've talked about today, in Spanish tomorrow on Friday at 11 a.m. Central Time on Facebook Live. So we'll talk in Spanish then. Okay. So we have a question. All right. Okay. All right. So Diego asks, is it possible for Venezuelans who have been in the country, I think he means the United States, for a long time to get asylum? The answer is yes, maybe. So the answer is maybe. Yeah, I talked earlier about these exceptions to the 1-year filing deadline. And actually a lot of Venezuelans do qualify for this because a lot of them are here on a student visa or on a work visa, a business visa, and they've maintained their legal status for a long time and still have it at the time they apply. So yeah, a lot of them do. But if you've been here for years, if you came on a tourist visa, and that visa, when you came in at the airport, they give you a stamp that says, okay, you can stay for 6 months, and you've been here for 3 years, and you never extended that, and you didn't change your status to a legal status. So basically, you've been out of status, had no legal status for years, then you're probably not going to be able to get asylum because of the 1-year filing deadline, which trips up so many people. Okay. Okay. John asks about. Okay. I think what the question is getting at is this. He's asking about filing asylum, even though you don't qualify, so that you can go to immigration court, and that sounds kind of strange. Let me explain. I'm pretty sure I understand what he's asking with this question, and it's an important one to address. Some people who know they have no shot at getting asylum apply for asylum so that they can get sent to immigration court, because they may be eligible in immigration court to get this other kind of benefit called cancellation of relief, which basically gives you a green card, gives you permanent residence if you meet certain conditions, including um, having been here for 10 years, and have good moral characters, a few other things. It's really hard to get though, okay? You have to show that there would be like exceptionally, I forgot what the phrase is, but unusual, super, super, super bad hardship to a qualifying family member who's like a U.S. citizen or green card holder and is your spouse or child, if you were to get deported. Long story short, people do this. They apply for asylum for the purpose of getting into immigration court, because you can't apply for this cancellation of removal thing unless you're in immigration court. And going to an asylum interview, getting refused there, or getting what they call referred, is a way to get into immigration court where you can apply for this benefit. Now, it's super risky. It's super risky. First of all, there's questions about whether it's ethical to do that. I don't do it as a lawyer. I don't help people do this. I think that you should only apply for asylum if you have somewhat of a chance, or you can at least make an argument that passes the laugh test as to why you should qualify for asylum. I don't think you should do it just for the purpose of getting to immigration court. It's super risky because getting cancellation of removal in immigration court is super hard. And if you don't get it, then you're going to get deported probably. So I would talk to an immigration lawyer and really think hard about that strategy before going forward with it. Question, could you give a consultation for the interview? Okay, yeah, good question. In fact, I made a video about this yesterday, about that I'm going to post today or tomorrow, about what you can do if you've already applied for asylum. So it sounds, from Haiti, thanks for the question. It sounds like you probably are someone who already submitted your asylum application, probably by yourself or maybe with help from a preparer who helps with the documents or whatever. And that you're waiting now for your interview. And so your question, it sounds like, is, well, can you get help to prepare for your interview, even though you've already started the process by yourself? The answer is yes, absolutely. There's a lot of things that you can do to get help that will still help you and increase your chances for success, even if you've already submitted your application, okay? And so that is one of the things that I do for people. I do this for my clients, and I also do it on a basis where someone didn't hire me originally, but then they want my help preparing for the interview. I do this, and I think it's extremely helpful. I offer a mock interview or a practice interview where we do everything that you're going to do at the asylum office from very beginning to the very end, and I make it as realistic as possible. I think that I'm well positioned to do this since I did it all the time as an asylum officer. So I think I have a sense for what it's going to be like and the questions that they're going to ask and how it's going to go based on the answers that you give and based on your facts of your case. So yeah, you asked, could you give a consultation for the interview? I wouldn't call it a consultation. I call it a mock interview, a practice interview where we do the whole thing, okay? And then I talk to you about it, debrief you, and tell you, here are things that maybe you could have said in a different way to be more clear. Here are things to be aware of. And what is the benefit of this? Well, the main thing is then you go into your real interview feeling much more comfortable because you know what to expect. You know what's coming. You know how it feels to be interrogated, frankly. Because as I said earlier, this is a stressful environment. It's different than probably anything you've experienced. And because of that, people make mistakes. And if you do a practice interview and you talk with an immigration lawyer or an asylum lawyer who really knows what goes on during an interview, then you're going to know what to expect. You're going to feel more comfortable. And because of that, I think you're less likely to make these little mistakes that can mess up your case and make them think that you're lying or just make you have a bad interview such that you don't really express adequately what's going on. So yeah, the answer is yes. I'd be happy to do a practice interview with you and to talk about the ways that you can increase your chances for success. Libna asks, what would happen if the harm is psychological and no one directly tells you something? What would happen if the harm is psychological and no one directly tells you something? I'm not sure I entirely understand the question, but I think what you're asking is maybe a situation where no one has threatened you directly, but threats in general, maybe about people like you, have caused great psychological harm to you. I don't know. At first blush, on the top of my head, I'm having trouble imagining a scenario where something like that where an officer would likely consider that to be harm, psychological harm that is sufficiently severe to count as persecution, because that is one of the things you normally have to show that someone intends to harm you specifically. And if they're threatening to harm you specifically, like, I'm gonna kill you, and they point a gun at you, and you think they're about to kill you, that can be sufficiently severe to be persecution. But if it's just like, someone says, we're going to kill all people who belong to religion X, a certain X religion, and that causes harm to you, that stresses you out, it makes you depressed. I think that would be tough. That would be tough. But let me tell you this, Liebna. This is one of those things where you probably want to talk to someone. You probably want to do a consultation to where you can explain more what you mean and what has happened, and then I can tell you with more confidence, yeah, that sounds like something that might work, or something that probably would not work. So it's tough to say without more details. By the way, tell me where you're at in the comments. Where are you watching from? I'm in Houston right now. Is anyone watching in Houston? Where are you guys? And thanks for your comment earlier. I see that I appreciate you chiming in. Up in Minnesota, which is where I went to law school. Great state. I love it up there. Thanks for commenting, Ann. Okay, let me see. Another question. What's more important, the interview or the application? If I had to choose, the interview. The interview is more important, okay? It's more important, yeah. But that's not to say that the application materials are not important. They're very important, because it's your chance to set the stage. It's your chance to frame your case, all right? To present your case in a very certain way that makes it to where when you go into the interview, the asylum officer is already thinking, okay, I understand this case. I know what's going on. And based on what they've told me, it sounds like they deserve asylum. As long as they come into their interview and say the same things, and they don't have a lot of inconsistencies in their case, then yeah, this person gets asylum. Like, you want them to be in that mind frame before you set foot in their office. And your application materials are how you do that, okay? And I think there was another question that was very similar to this. Let me address that, because hold on. Okay, yeah. So there's a question from Omar that is about the personal statement. Okay, so Omar asks, how long should the personal statement be? Let me address this now, because it relates to the last question. What is a personal statement? First of all, it's something that people usually write that is part of their application materials. They submit with the form, because the form that you use to actually apply for asylum, it's not a good place to tell your story. There are a few questions like, what happened, or why are you afraid? But there's like this little box that you're supposed to write in, and then there's like an overflow area that you use if you write too much. But I don't want this form to dictate how you tell your story. Okay, how you tell your story should be done in a very particular way, in my opinion, based on my experience as an asylum officer. I have very particular opinions about how to do this, and I don't want the asylum form dictating how it gets told. So people usually submit what they call a personal statement or a declaration, which is basically where you write out on a few pieces of paper what's happened and why you're afraid. Okay, and the actual question was, how long should it be? Short. It should be short. All right. 3 pages I think is ideal. 4 is good too. I really try to keep it under not more than 4 pages for my clients. Why? You need to be succinct. All right. You need to give the asylum officer the information that they need in the easiest way possible, the easiest way to understand, in the clearest, cleanest way possible, without overloading them with extraneous, unnecessary details. I can tell you there's nothing more annoying for an asylum officer than getting a personal statement that is like 20 pages, single space, that takes like 3 hours to read. You know, okay, I mean, realistically, it might take 30 minutes, an hour to read some of these personal statements. And 98% of the information is completely irrelevant to the application. The officer does not care what your favorite sport was as a child, where you know, the name of your elementary school, or really usually about your college education, which, you know, I get it that people want to talk about these things because you want to express yourself. You want the officer to understand who you are. But I promise you, I strongly believe that this is not the place to do that. Neither in your asylum interview is not the place to do it either. You want to be focused on the things that they need to know to get asylum, to show them that you're qualified for asylum, okay? And so the way that you do the personal statement, it matters a great deal. You want it to hit all the elements that someone has to show to get asylum. Basically, the 5 things I talked about today in the way of reasons for rejections, those are the 5 main things that you want to address in your personal statement. But there's also a very particular way that I think you should talk about these things that have happened to you, that you should describe them. In fact, I made a really long video about this. I think it's like 37 minutes or maybe 27 that you'll find on on the Manning Asylum Law Facebook page or on the Manning Asylum Law YouTube channel, where I talk about how to write a personal statement, okay? I ask all of my clients to watch that, and then I also share other thoughts with them and help them craft the personal statement, because it's a really important way for you to set the stage for your case and to give yourself a chance for success, okay? Liebman, I see that you said you're in Lynchburg. Is that Virginia, I think? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I've spent a lot of time in Virginia. When I was a diplomat, I lived in the DC area in Northern Virginia a few times, and I loved it up there. I'm going to go for a couple more minutes. Hold on, let me address. There was a question over here that I definitely wanted to address. Where was that? Oh, okay. It was about do I need a lawyer for my interview? Yeah, in fact, in the video that I made yesterday that I'm going to post today or tomorrow at the latest, that I was telling you about earlier about things that a lawyer can do after you've already applied for asylum, but before you've had your interview, this is one of the things that I addressed. So I'm glad that Jonah asked about it. Thanks, Jonah. Thank you. Yeah, you should have a lawyer at your interview. Here's why. Just having a lawyer in the room changes things. Okay, as I said earlier, most asylum officers are professional and do a good job and treat people with respect. But sometimes there are some that don't. Okay, or maybe an officer's having a bad day and it's just a bad interview. Having a lawyer on your case and in the room just helps ensure that they treat you better and that they don't cut corners, that they follow the rules and they do everything right. Okay, the immigration agency is very much aware of who has a lawyer and who doesn't. In the immigration file that has all of your information about your case for you, at the very top of that is where the form goes that says, okay, this person has a lawyer. If you have a lawyer, that just shows you how important it is and how seriously they take it. It's literally the first thing that they want the officers to see. And so having them there helps to make the officer take it seriously and treat you well and right and respect your rights. But also, this is what's key. At the end of the interview, the lawyer gets a chance to say a few words. And this is where a good asylum lawyer can really add value to your case, because they can use this time to summarize your case, basically, to explain in a succinct, clear way in a language that the asylum officer speaks and understands, asylum speak, why you're qualified for asylum. But also, this is probably more important, is that when I'm in an interview, I can often tell, I think, based on the questions being asked and the atmosphere in the room, I can tell what the officer sees as a problem in the case. I think that I can tell what the officer views as a weakness in your case, and I use this time at the end of the interview to address that, to go back and say, well, look, we talked a lot about this certain thing. Let me say a few more words about that and explain. Basically, I use it to address the weaknesses in the case, or to address what the officer sees as stumbling blocks, and it's the last chance you get to try to change their mind about those things. And so that's where I think I really add value to an asylum interview. And along with the question about whether I help do consultations for interviews, yeah, I mean I do the mock interview, and I also in certain cases I'm happy to represent you at your interview, even if you already submitted the application on your own. And also I'm willing to start helping someone in their case by writing a legal brief, because for my clients that I represent from the beginning to end, one of the things that I do for them is I submit a legal brief. I call it a statement of the case that explains why they get asylum. Okay, I was shocked when I was an asylum officer to see that lawyers don't do this. Probably 10% do this. I was really surprised by this. They don't explain to the asylum officer in writing why their client should get asylum. They just leave it up to the officer to connect the dots. You don't want to do that. You want to have someone who understands your situation and who understands the law and policy at issue to be able to connect the dots between those two things, to apply your facts of your case to the law and say, based on these facts, when considered in light of the law and policy that the government uses for deciding asylum cases, this person gets asylum. Okay? Don't leave it up to the asylum officer to make them do the hard work of making those connections and making sure that every box is checked in order to be able to grant someone asylum. I want to do that for you. I want to do that for the officer. I want to make their job as easy as possible. And I want to give them a roadmap when I write this brief or statement of the case that walks them through everything that they need to know and do, or everything they need to know to decide whether my client gets asylum. So that's another thing. If you've already applied for asylum on your own, but you're thinking now, maybe I want to get some help, then that's one of the things. Those are the big three things that I do for people in that situation. I write a brief for them that explains why they get asylum, and I do lots of research about the country conditions, which can be relevant to this argument. I advise them as to what other documents and kind of evidence they might want to try to get that will help their case, because it's not too late usually to submit additional evidence or documents in your case. Even if you've already applied, you can do that later. And I also will do the mock interview with people and give them all my best tips for the interview, and then I can also represent them at the interview. So those are all things that I love to do for people, even if they've already applied. Okay, so Liebna asked another question about if someone applies for asylum and has been waiting for the court date for 5 years, can that person apply for a green card, or is it more or less than 5 years, or doesn't apply at all? So the fact that you have an asylum application pending that hasn't been decided yet for 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, no, does not. That does not allow you to apply for a green card or for permanent residence. It doesn't help you, unfortunately. Probably my guess is that what you're thinking of, what you had in mind with the reference to 5 years, is this thing that I mentioned earlier called cancellation of removal, which says that if you've been in the country a certain amount of time and meet certain other conditions, you may be able to get a green card based on that. For the 5 years comes from people who, people who already have a green card can basically have this defense to deportation of cancellation of removal if they've been here for 5 years in some cases. People who don't have a green card and want to get this defense to deportation have to have been here for 10 years. I'm guessing that's where the 5-year thing that you're talking about comes from, where you got that from. But in your case, if you're applying for asylum, that probably means you don't already have a green card. If you have a green card, then you should look into cancellation of removal. Yes, no, not if you've been in immigration court, because the time for counting whether that counts for the 5 or 10 years is normally just before you got told that you have to go to immigration court. So the short answer to your question is probably not. This is the fact that it's been pending is probably not going to help you, unfortunately. Okay, I'm gonna I'm gonna wrap it up. thank you so much for being with me.